In China, the will of the people has been thwarted by the will of the people's government. It was late at night in Beijing this morning, our time, when a divided leadership of the Communist Party finally decided it had had enough. The anarchy in Beijing, it said, would have to end. And so the leader of the party, who's opposed to force, was moved aside, and additional troops from the People's Army were ordered to move into the city. But before the troops even got close to Tiananmen Square, the enormous crowds were out in the streets again, blocking their way. Our first report on this astonishing day is from John Lawrence.
The People's Army came face to face with the Chinese people and was stopped in its tracks. This convoy of 17 trucks filled with soldiers got as close as 3 miles to Tiananmen Square and could go no farther. Thousands of demonstrators blocked the streets with their bodies. The protesters sang patriotic songs and chanted slogans for freedom and democracy. The People's Army is for the people, they cried. You are one of us. Some of the demonstrators offered the soldiers water, but it was refused. The commanding officer was outnumbered and surrounded. There was nothing in military doctrine for a situation like this, so his men sat and waited for further orders. It was a tactical victory for the demonstrators, not over the soldiers, but the government that ordered them to move in.
I think crackdown is political suicide for the government.
At another point, northeast of the square, a human chain blocked the way of another army convoy. Here, too, it was a standoff. A bus blocked the route on a third street leading to the square, as barricades began to appear on the major roads. This woman begged a soldier to consider the hunger-striking students. They've been fasting there for 7 days, she said. You should not harm them. We are all Chinese. At least one of the soldiers was sympathetic, saying, "The student movement is positive." As the hours passed, the soldiers became more relaxed. There were discussions. Some soldiers said they were only told their unit was going to Beijing for military exercises. Some of them started to settle in for what remained of the night. It is early morning here in the square, and the thousands of people who are gathered here are waiting to see and to take part in what happens next. The government's decision to send in the troops has increased the determination of the demonstrators significantly. The students and their supporters were surprised and angered as they listened to a taped speech by Premier Li Peng that was also shown on television. He warned, the capital is in a critical situation. The anarchic state is going from bad to worse. Li Peng declared, we are forced to take resolute and decisive measures to put an end to the turmoil. The reaction was rebellious. Thousands of people poured into the square to continue the protest. One of the student leaders said the hunger strike would now continue, blaming Li Peng and the government. Many of the hunger strikers had agreed to call off their fast, but reversed their decision after listening to Li Peng. The situation at the emergency medical station in the square was becoming critical. The conditions of some students was causing serious concern among the medical staff. And as the mass hunger strike and demonstrations of support went into their 8th day, both sides in the conflict were escalating their actions. John Lawrence, ABC News, Tiananmen Square, Beijing.
There has been speculation all week that one thing preventing the government from cracking down sooner was the presence of Mikhail Gorbachev and the occasion of the Chinese-Soviet summit. Listening to party officials today, they were clearly angry that the students had upset the Gorbachev visit. Gorbachev left China yesterday. Today, the threat that the crackdown was coming. ABC's Todd Carroll is in Beijing.
China's people saw government policy change before their eyes on television today. On the news at noon, the official most sympathetic to the students, Communist Party leader Zhao Ziyang, made an emotional appeal to those at Tiananmen Square to go home. At the end of his talk, viewers nationwide could see students seeking his autograph. On the evening news, the tone was harsher, with Premier Li Peng warning the hunger strikers and their supporters to go home. The television news, which had carried remarkably candid reports on the demonstrations, was reverting to the party line. Later, in a special broadcast after midnight, Li Peng delivered an angry speech, blaming the protests on a small group of conspirators and calling for a restoration of order. He said the Communist Party runs this country and its leadership must be protected. China then heard from Yang Shangkun, its ceremonial president and military leader, who declared the capital was in a state of anarchy and troops would be sent in. It was Yang who said he was humiliated again and again by the protests. On Monday, he was forced to greet Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev at the airport instead of the normal site in front of the Great Hall of the People. Then, Gorbachev's wreath-laying ceremony at the square was canceled, and Yang even complained that tonight he had to be driven an hour and a half out of his way just to reach his meeting. He and Li Peng painted themselves as protectors of 84-year-old Deng Xiaoping, a main target of the demonstrations. During tonight's announcement, Zhao Ziyang was not among the stern group of party leaders, a signal that he has been sidelined, presumably for being too conciliatory to the protesters. The last time a party leader was forced out, it was for exactly the same reasons. And it was that man, Hu Yaobang, whose death last month sparked the protests that have snowballed into a broad-based revolt for democracy and political change. Todd Carroll, ABC News, Beijing.